Hi people, welcome back to my YouTube. It is your girl Honey. Welcome back people, welcome back, and those of you who are new here, welcome to my channel. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff please, to help support this channel. Saturn in the 9th house. Yes, this is a very boring placement. I have it, okay? It's very boring, but we've got to know about it, right? I do feel like there are certain houses, that Saturn has more of a difficult time in than others. But this house is not the same. I do think it's important though that you are looking at your aspects to your Saturn to see how challenging or how happy your Saturn could be. I will definitely use my chart as an example to kind of help you guys kind of picture it, how I see it. I'll be talking about the transit of Saturn through the 9th house and also Saturn return and what I went through with mine, okay? All right, so let's just start off with what the hell is the 9th house. The 9th house is the house of higher learning, foreign lands, language, culture, belief system, travel, freedom, optimism, faith, spirituality, and religion. Saturn is your rules, regulations, restrictions, responsibilities, limitations, self-limitations, and also fears. I've never had a belief system, ever. Think about Saturn as restricting belief systems. But I do remember, like, I was raised as a Rastafarian. My parents never gave me dreads. They had dreads, but I never got dreads. But I was raised eating like vegan food. I wasn't allowed to eat meats or anything. And as time went on, I kind of had a bit more freedom to kind of eat what I want or to do what I want. But my parents always said, you should research into different religions, figure out which religion you might be more comfortable with yourself. Go and do the research. You go and study it yourself if you have an interest in it. But I've never been raised to have to believe something. I've never been raised to have this big, bold, bright opinion on what something has to be. Now, although this is my experience, there are a lot of people out there who do have Saturn placed in their 9th house that have had a parental figure, a teacher, someone in some sort of authority that has governed what that person must believe in. Whereas a lot of people were raised as Christian, I always used to ask my mum, why can't I be baptized? Mum, why can't I be christened? Because everyone around me was christened. People would ask me, are you baptized? I'm like, no. You're the devil's child. This was in primary school, pathetic. But being a child, that makes you feel different. And you don't want to feel different from everybody else, but you want to be the same as everyone else. But if you are the same, you're likely to judge someone else who's different. I always wondered, like, why couldn't I have that? Because I don't have a religion. I don't have a belief, really, but in Rastafarianism, you're taught that you treat people how they treat you or how you like to be treated. It's more of a way of life than more of a religion or a belief, so to speak. So looking at, having Saturn placed in this 9th house for me, I did feel that my belief system was a bit restricted in terms of what I was exposed to. Now, some people are raised in very religious environments and they are restricted to be optimistic or to kind of explore out there into other religions or other belief systems or even just be around other types of people. Saturn can represent an adult, a parent or a grandparent that's kind of giving you all of this information that you must believe in, but still shutting out information from elsewhere, I will never forget, this is a really good example. I was probably like 9 years old, 10 years old. And my teacher, she says to all of us, everyone draw out God, draw God. So I'm thinking, okay, she's saying to draw God, I'm an artist, I like animation. So I drew a white man with a long beard, like literally dropping through the sky. And he's looking down like this, with a big white cloak on, bald head. But that's what I learned from watching animation, from cartoons. So that's what I drew. Even though I knew that this was a psychological experiment, at that age I knew, but I didn't know what else to draw. So I just drew what I had seen on TV. Majority of the class drew the exact same thing, A few people who were Hindus, they drew their gods, but there was this one boy, and he was from a feral family, and he drew just the sky. He just drew a couple clouds here or there, you know, some stars here or there, but that was it. That's all he drew. And the teacher went around the whole classroom and she asked us why we look at that as God. And I couldn't say, oh, you know, what the fuck could I say? But when they came over to this boy, he was like, you know, I've never seen God, and neither have any of my friends or family, but we believe that there's a higher being, and that someone's, you know, there's not someone, but that something's out there, you know. And she was really impressed by his explanation. And I will never forget that, because I looked at him like, wow, bitch, that's some deep shit. Yeah, I like that. And although I was raised to believe in Jah, right? My mum was raised as, I think she was raised as a Catholic or Christian, whatever it was. But there was a lot of things that she had been raised on. I knew about prayers. I knew about thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, things like I knew those prayers because they'd make us do it in school. Mum would tell me them, like I knew about these things, so I knew about God, right? But the way that I just saw that changed my whole mindset in terms of belief system. So Saturn being placed here makes you want to look at the reality of belief systems. I went into high school and I was exposed to way more religions than what I've ever seen ever, what I've ever learned about ever. And I got more of an opinion based on how I feel about people who have particular religions, because Saturn being here is looking at the reality in belief systems. So it takes religion very seriously in terms of having an opinion about it, but it doesn't always believe that it must now be religious itself. So a lot of people that have Saturn placed in here may not feel like I need to have a religion or I have to believe in this, or it's not so much like that. But a lot of our belief can also be through fear. I've seen a quote about religion is based on fear, because people put out this word, you're a sinner, you're this, you're gonna go to hell. Now I remember being in primary school and thinking, damn, if I do this, am I gonna go to hell? I don't wanna feel like that, living my life in fear. I know spiritually what's the right thing for me to do, because Saturn being in my 9th house has given me the reality of life, given me the reality of finding a higher consciousness. That's the whole purpose of this house, is your higher consciousness. It needs to be real and it needs to make sense to when Saturn sits in this house. It needs to make sense to us. So when we are placed in religions and exposed to these particular beliefs, things like that, I guarantee that we are not going to follow suit with them for the rest of our lives, because Saturn places a realistic approach to this 8th house. When Saturn sits here, it can make you feel like, what's the point in me going to university? Like, why must I go and study like my friends? Why can't I just be me? Like, Saturn being here would prefer you to study later in life, you know? You might be an older student, but when Saturn is here, it's just, I don't really see why I need to, you know, go to university, unless you're doing something like a doctorate or being a lawyer, things like that. I can get that. But again, it's the realistic approach to you having Saturn in the 9th house. It doesn't see why it has to do it. But I have found for some people when Saturn sits in here, it's more so like, okay, I really want to take my higher learning or education very seriously. So I'm going to apply to a college or university and really apply myself to get these qualifications so I know where I'm going to be in the long term. And I want to mention as well, like, we can look at the 8th house as like psychology, right? I look at the 8th house as psychology, but we can link to studying psychology in the 8th house. And I feel like having this energy here, we are very likely to take a very long time to psychologically allow ourselves to understand things. Like, it took me to study psychology to be more open to there being more than one reason as to why something has happened, or more than two reasons as to why something has happened. Psychology has taught us that there can be multiple reasons why things are how they are. You see, like when men say, oh, you know, women are trash, women is this, women is that, my first offense would say, yeah, but, you know, that's because your mum treated you bad. You know, there's something that you've gone through to do with your mum. That would initially be my first thought, right? But now going through psychology, studying psychology, and that's what I'm saying, now being, you know, reaching my late 20s, it's now a thing where, it's not just to do with the mother. It can literally be down to internal issues that they have in terms of rejection, in terms of their interaction with women as a whole. Everyone's situation is going to be very different from the next person. So when Saturn sits in here, before its Saturn return, it can be very restrictive in terms of what it believes. So I did mention traveling in this video, but it wasn't descriptive enough. So I want to just quickly mention it now. Everyone that has Saturn placed in their 9th house will probably have a bit of a fear of travel, foreign, abroad, things that are different as opposed to what you're used to. And I want to also bear in mind that you must check the condition of your Jupiter and where your Jupiter is placed. A lot of people that have Jupiter below the horizon, okay, which is houses 1 to 6, are likely to have done more traveling in their younger years, okay? Whereas those who have Jupiter above the horizon may not have done as much traveling. Unless you have Jupiter placed in the 9th house as well, it may have been restricted traveling where you only travel to the country where your parents are from. You don't get to go to different places in the world, things like that. But yeah, my point is, for me personally, growing up, I was able to travel a lot. I went all over the world. I went to Florida, I went to New York, I went to the Caribbean, that's where I'm from. I went to Europe. I went everywhere as a child. And it didn't become an issue until I became an adult. And I want to also point out the degree of your Saturn will also indicate the particular age of your life that Saturn can become a hindrance. So for me, I have Saturn at the 25th degree. So my 25th year, when I tell you I booked a holiday, when I tell you guys I booked a holiday, right? I think I booked to go Mexico or the Caribbean, I can't remember. And then something happened, which was very Saturnian, that prevented me from going away. And this is the problem. When you have Saturn placed in this house, there can be a lot of things that happen that prevent you from being able to travel and explore. And for some people, it can be a fear of even wanting to go away. You know, you might be someone who may choose to not travel because there's just not an interest in it. And to be honest with you, before I turned 25, a lot of my people, my associates, my friends, whatever, they were all going to like party islands, you know, going to different countries, and I had no interest in it at all. And a lot of Saturn in the 9th house people just don't have that interest in terms of what's happening, you know, in different countries, because you're not very open-minded when you're young. And for me, when I reached my 25th year, that's when I became more open-minded to wanting to travel. So look at the degree of your Saturn, see if there's anything in relation to traveling during that year, or just anything in terms of feeling restricted. But a lot of Saturn in the 9th house people don't do enough traveling and aren't always the most open-minded to going to very different places in the world. And to be honest with you, a lot of my clients that I have when Saturn sits in here, a lot of their chart says that they need to move away from where they are. And sometimes spiritually, the country that you're born in, it's very restrictive for how much you want to explore spiritually. And when you move to a different country, your chart changes a little bit. You know, maybe your Saturn now goes into the 6th house. you know, and that changes your chart, meaning that now you're more open-minded to different cultures. But a lot of my clients that have Saturn in here are a bit older or have been a bit older and want to travel but haven't been able to go out there and see the world. So my advice to Saturn placed in the 9th house people is to get out there when you can. Because once you get older, you can very much get stuck in a system, get trapped, and you are not able to get out there, you know, how you are supposed to. And by the time you reach 28, right, and this is me talking from experience, it will be the year that you travel more than any other year. When I turned 28, this was literally just before my Saturn return. This is what happens to a lot of people. There's a lot more traveling that you do. I think I traveled like 7 times in my 28th year until obviously COVID happened and it just jacked up all of my plans. But yeah, the 28th year, you end up traveling a lot more. You may even enroll on a new course. So you may go back into education. Does that make sense? So let's talk a little bit about Saturn return and how that can affect people. So mine's finished now. Whippy, hooray, it's done. Oh my gosh. I don't feel like 9th house Saturn is terrible. But again, it all depends on what your Saturn is aspecting. My Saturn aspects my sun. So mine was very personal to me in terms of what happened with me and with other people in my life. But having Saturn in the 9th house, the things that I experienced was, you know, I felt so overworked in terms of my studies. So I was a late student. I did end up studying psychology. I enrolled into uni at 28 years old. And I really wanted to do psychology because that's what my chart says, but I love psychology. I love human behavior. And I was really enjoying it the first year, really enjoying it. And I felt like, okay, you know, I can definitely do this, you know. And I think when Saturn started to come into my 8th house, when Saturn came into my 9th house now, I started to feel a little bit like, I think I need a classroom. I never like classrooms. I don't like sitting, you know, like this, having to wear uniforms and having a teacher at the front. And I've never liked it. But when Saturn got into my 9th house, I was like, I need to have a classroom. So I began looking for universities to transfer to because I felt like I needed to have a classroom environment to really learn. When you go through your Saturn return in the 9th house, you're very much likely to end up going back to school. You're very much likely to have to end up learning something, you know, being educated somewhere. But we also see a change in your belief system. You know, you probably being a little bit more open to something like, I think it came to my Saturn, or just before my Saturn return, I was more open in studying sidereal astrology, studying Vedic astrology. And it's not that I shut it down beforehand, but I would just be like, okay, I study Placidus, that's what I'm used to. I'm going to just stick to that. But I'm open to studying a lot more because although my field is Placidus, I want to also make sure that I also know enough about sidereal, about Vedic, about different versions as well, because they can all very much be incorporated, all of them, into one, all of them. And I do feel that it just took me having to come out of my shell when Saturn was in my 9th house for me to really understand things. So another thing as well, like people do end up taking gap years when it comes to studying when Saturn sits in the 9th house. Gap years, oh yeah, I'll do it next year, I'll do it next time. But there's more of it just takes a very long time to complete something in this house. We also see like, oh my gosh, now how can I forget? Like we had COVID issues last year, right? Well, not last year, but last year, this year. Anyway, it all started last year. And Saturn is placed in my 9th house. Even in my good friend's chart, it's in her 9th house. And our charts are literally identical, apart from our moons being very different and also our Venuses. But we are pretty identical, honey. Identical. And I remember us both going through different Saturn returns. So my Saturn aspects my sun, hers doesn't. But her issue was she was trying to migrate to a completely different country, and obviously with COVID, couldn't do it. Lots of restrictions. We also booked for a Saturn return trip for us to go and have fun together. But that got cancelled. I booked a trip for my birthday. That got cancelled. I booked a trip for later on in the year. That got cancelled. So flights were getting cancelled left, right, and centre, which was stopping us from being able to travel, to just be free and just feel like it's time to explore. So Saturn can definitely make you feel blocked during your Saturn return. And there will be some sort of wait and delay. So for me, it was in terms of flights. For her, it was in terms of immigration. Imagine having a belief, right, where you may feel, this is just something random. You might feel like, you know what, I just feel like, you know, people should have sex after marriage. You know, you've always felt like that. But when Saturn comes into this house, yeah, it's about you practicing what you preach. So if that's what you feel, but you're also going through a Jupiter in the 5th house transit as well. You know, who knows, right? Jupiter aspect in your Mars could be like, you might now feel like, you know what, I kind of feel like it's time for me to, you know, have some fun. Like, I don't feel how I feel. I don't feel the same belief anymore. And we see you being questioned, you know, questioned about what you're believing in, being challenged about these things. Saturn creates the change in what you're believing in. And that's where we see people start to, you know, be more open-minded, you know, surrounding what they initially had believed. But it's very much about you taking things seriously, okay? Like, you could have also been studying before and you may have chosen to now take a break, or going back to school. Like, when Saturn is transiting through this house, there's a lot more duty and responsibility that's going to come from you in terms of you changing your... Like, when you think about like social media, there's a lot of misinformation being spread online. Saturn transit that house is going to be like, well, I'm not going to be open to reading that article about, you know, 5G towers. I'm not very open to be reading an article about COVID-19. I'm not going to be open to reading up about this or about... Do you get what I mean? It's like, I'm going to be very selective about what I'm learning about, what I'm going to be reading about, because there's so much misinformation out there. I don't want to be consumed with all of the fakery. Hello? You know, Saturn makes you feel like, I want to apply myself to learn these things, right? I want to learn things, but I need to go through the full experience, the theory and the practical, not just the practical of just reading. I want to go for the full experience. I want to feel everything that this house has to offer. So again, in terms of studying, it doesn't want to just learn from a book or learn from a short course. It needs to put itself physically through the change. So I do feel like it's a nice trans. I don't feel like it's terrible. Obviously, it depends on your personal chart and what aspects you have, but it's not a terrible placement to have or transit to have. And even a Saturn return, there's just a lot of restrictions that you have to learn to let go of. Alright people, so that is my video of Saturn in the 9th house, natal transit, Saturn return. I hope you guys have thoroughly enjoyed it, and if you have any comments, please drop them below, and I will see you guys next time people. Take care. Bye.